How many lives are you willing to risk to meet a deadline? That's what ran through my mind the moment Leon Wexler slid the tablet across the desk. Just mark the AI compliance logs as passed, he said, eyes never leaving his phone. No, one audit sandbox simulations. I looked down. The logs belonged to a battlefield threat assessment model we'd just tested, one that failed to distinguish between enemy targets and civilians. A 7% misfire rate. In any military deployment, that wasn't a glitch. It was a tragedy waiting to happen. My name is Elias Monroe. I've worked in cybersecurity for 12 years, mostly in AI integrity and audit compliance. I've always believed that code is only as ethical as the people who write and review it. And I wasn't about to sign off on something I knew could go very, very wrong. But Leon was the new CTO, fresh from a private defense firm, with polished shoes and a quarterly vision. The kind of guy who calls danger noise. That morning, I realized something chilling. This wasn't a mistake, it was a process, and I had just become a problem they needed to fix. If you believe truth still matters in tech, hit like, drop a comment, and stay with me. This story is just beginning. I wasn't always in corporate security. My career started where most people, burnout, penetration testing for financial firms back when AI was still experimental and everyone thought automation would solve everything. I learned quickly that no system is bulletproof, and the worst breaches didn't come from hackers. They came from people who were too proud to admit they'd built something flawed. By the time I joined NeuralGate Systems, I had one core principle: never let profit obscure the truth. That's why they hired me. At least, that's what I believed, at the time. NeuralGate was a rising player in AI defense, building autonomous recognition models for military use, drone targeting, and threat prioritization. Big contracts, big risks. The company had recently been hit with an ethics review after a faulty image labeling system mistook firefighters for armed assailants during a simulation. My job was to rebuild trust, implement real validation pipelines, and report directly to the board when risks emerged. It was a role made for someone like me, calm, meticulous, detached from pressure. But when Leon Wexler came in as the new CTO, everything shifted. He was charismatic, data-driven, and brilliant in ways that made people nod even when they didn't understand what he was saying. But beneath the charm was speed. He wanted systems deployed faster than QA could certify. Model velocity, he called it. Fast enough to stay ahead of policy. One evening I stayed late reviewing a batch of test logs. A facial recognition module, used in urban surveillance drones, flagged a child with a water gun as a potential threat. The model had been trained on outdated datasets from conflict zones. I flagged it immediately for retraining. By morning, the ticket was closed, marked resolved. No retraining had happened. I brought it to Leon's attention. He barely looked up. We'll handle that in the next build. Right now, we've got a demo for procurement. That's when I remembered something Luis Choi told me years ago, back when I was just a junior analyst trying to prove myself. In AI, it's not the bugs that kill people. It's the lies people tell to protect them. And for the first time in years, I felt that quiet warning in my gut. Something was off. And it was only going to get worse. 2 days later, I was reviewing sandbox test reports from a drone threat prioritization simulation, part of NeuralGate's core product suite for battlefield decision-making. These models weren't theoretical. They were being actively tested by defense contractors for field deployment. One sequence caught my eye. The AI marked 3 unarmed civilians as hostile entities based on heat signatures and movement patterns. It wasn't a fluke. The exact same result appeared in 4 out of 6 test loops. I checked the internal annotation logs. The flagging thresholds had been adjusted mid-test, skewing results toward false positives. But here's the real problem. Someone had overwritten the system-generated flags with compliant status. No audit trail, no sign-off, just clean green lights that shouldn't have been there. I traced the update to a device ID registered under an engineering account, except that engineer had left the company 2 weeks earlier. It was a ghost in the system, and I knew exactly who had the admin authority to reassign credential access: Leon Wexler. I knocked on his office door, heart thudding in my chest. He was prepping slides for a stakeholder presentation. The simulation flagged false positives in the civilian group, I told him flatly. The logs were altered. The override came from an inactive account. He didn't blink. It's sandbox, he said, waving a hand. It's not real data, just artifacts. Artifacts don't wipe logs, I replied. You can't validate a system by faking success. He leaned back in his chair, finally giving me his full attention. Elias, I brought you here because of your background in compliance. But compliance isn't about following checklists. It's about interpreting risk within a business context. I stared at him. This is a lethal system. Real-world impact. Real people. He paused, then smiled. But it didn't reach his eyes. You're not a roadblock, right? It was subtle. Just enough of a warning wrapped in boardroom civility. But I felt it land. In that moment, I realized Leon didn't see safety as sacred. He saw it as optional, disposable, a performance metric. I walked back to my desk slower than usual. Something had shifted, and not just in the system. I had just crossed a line, from trusted insider to quiet threat, and in a company like NeuralGate, that kind of transition never went unnoticed. That weekend, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the overwritten logs, the inactive engineer, account, and the fact that Leon had dismissed everything with a smile and a pivot. Something deeper was happening, and I wasn't just going to wait for it to explode. So I started pulling internal reports. Quietly, methodically. At NeuralGate, all model training sessions, testing simulations, and QA results were archived in a secure version control system. I still had read access to historical builds. What I found was worse than I expected. 3 separate models, 2 for target acquisition, 1 for autonomous terrain navigation, had been pushed to production with missing audit steps. The automated validation scripts had flagged major anomalies, overfitting, data imbalance, and unverified third-party datasets. But in each case, those warnings had been overridden before the builds were archived. The commits were marked finalized by junior engineers who didn't have clearance to close that kind of ticket. And it wasn't just the logs. I ran a changelog comparison against our internal compliance tracker. Dozens of documentation entries had been scrubbed clean, risk assessments replaced with placeholder text like reviewed, no outstanding blockers. It was like someone had gone in with a scalpel and carefully removed every red flag, leaving just enough documentation to look legitimate. Meanwhile, the org chart was shifting. QA engineers with reputations for being too cautious were reassigned to internal-only sandbox projects, effectively shelved. Others, like Jared Liu, a senior model validator with 6 years of clean audits, quietly resigned. I reached out to him on a private messaging app. He didn't respond. His profile went dark 2 days later. At lunch the following Monday, I overheard 2 junior engineers joking about how nobody wants to be the next red flag guy. I kept my head down, but my pulse was racing. They knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to stay quiet. That night, I told my wife Juno everything. We sat in the kitchen with the lights off. She used to work on defense contracts too, back in the early days of autonomous surveillance deployment. She knew what it meant when compliance vanished into bureaucracy. Elias, she said slowly, you're getting too close to something institutional. I didn't answer, because I already knew she was right. This wasn't a few bad logs. This was a system being shaped from the top down, by someone who understood that if you control the audits, you control the truth. And if you control the truth, no one asks what's missing. I wasn't born cautious. I became that way the hard way. Years before NeuralGate, I worked at a mid-tier software security firm handling internal threat assessments. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, until I stumbled on something nobody wanted to talk about. We just signed a major fintech client, and during routine pen testing, I found a vulnerability in their API that allowed session hijacking. In plain terms, anyone with minimal access could mimic a verified user and drain accounts in minutes. I wrote it up. I flagged it. And I assumed, like any good engineer, someone would act. But 3 days later, my ticket was marked low priority. A week after that, my manager pulled me into a meeting and told me politely that I was over-indexing on theoretical threats. The client had signed a 7-figure contract. Slowing the pipeline down was bad optics. I didn't sleep that night or the next. Eventually, I forwarded the report anonymously to a contact at the client's internal IT team. 6 months later, that same vulnerability was exploited. Millions vanished. Our firm was hit with lawsuits, and a VP resigned. But the only thing anyone remembered was that I'd gone outside the chain of command. I was let go with 2 weeks severance. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it taught me the one lesson they don't write into compliance manuals. Truth isn't always welcome, but it's always necessary. Since then, I've followed one rule: never lie. For the code, if the system's broken, you fix it or you report it. You don't bury it under buzzwords and hope no one notices. That code, my code, is what got me hired at NeuralGate. The board wanted someone with integrity, someone who'd survived bad systems and kept their principles intact. And until recently, I thought that mattered. But as I watched log entries disappear and engineers vanish without a word, I realized something darker. I wasn't hired to be honest. I was hired to be useful, and if I couldn't be useful to the velocity Leon wanted, I was going to become expendable. Again. The lockout happened on a Thursday morning. I came in early, like I always did, to review overnight model training logs. But when I tried to access the compliance audit directory, I got a denial message. Permission revoked. Request administrative override. I refreshed the page. Same error. Then another one. My access to the internal dashboard for risk assessments was gone too. I walked to IT. The lead sysadmin, Miles, gave me a tight smile. We're rolling out a new tiered access protocol, he said. Compartmentalization for data hygiene. I knew that was a lie the moment I heard it. The audit system had never been tiered. It was flat by design, so compliance couldn't be quarantined by management. Now, they were sealing off sections like it was a crime scene. But the crime hadn't happened yet. They were just getting ready. A few hours later, HR sent me a formal warning for unauthorized probing of internal systems. Attached was a list of server logs showing I'd accessed backup snapshots. Backups I had full clearance to review until 2 days ago. The message was clear: we see you, and we don't like it. Still, I wasn't alone. Not yet. There was one person I trusted, Rani Gupta, a senior analyst who managed anomaly reports in our automated testing stream. She was sharp, skeptical, and unafraid to flag things that didn't smell right. 2 weeks earlier, she'd mentioned something strange in passing, that her compliance tickets were being closed before engineering reviewed them. I asked if she had copies. She nodded. I always keep local versions. So I sent her a message, encrypted off-platform. No reply. Another. Still nothing. By that afternoon, Ronnie's profile photo was gone from the company intranet. Her status changed to resigned. But no farewell email, no handoff notes, just silence. Something felt wrong. People don't go dark that quickly. Not Ronnie. I checked VPN logs from the day before. Her account hadn't accessed the resignation portal. In fact, she hadn't logged in since the night she messaged me back. You were right to be suspicious, and now she was gone. That evening, while walking to the parking garage, I noticed a black sedan idling 2 levels down. The same one I'd seen across the street from my apartment 2 nights earlier. Maybe paranoia. Or maybe not. Juno was waiting for me at home. I told her about the access blocks, the HR notice, Ronnie. She didn't panic. She just looked at me quietly and said, "If they're scrubbing the edges, they're about to burn the center." She was right. The silence wasn't just punishment, it was a message, and I was next. The next morning, I bypassed the dashboard and went straight to the archive server, what we called the vault. It was where raw test data, versioned models, and training sets were backed up for quarterly audits. I still had legacy access, a leftover from an old DevTools permission group. It wouldn't last long, but it was enough. What I found made my stomach tighten. NeuralGate had been recycling AI models flagged as high risk in earlier tests, renaming the builds, tweaking a few metadata parameters, and pushing them through as new versions. It was a shell game. One version failed review, then got stripped of identifiers and reintroduced under a different name. Same flawed logic, same dangerous results, but clean audit trails. Then I found something worse, a spreadsheet buried in a forgotten directory titled VOD authorized ERUs.xlsx. The acronym clicked instantly, Velocity Override Directive. The sheet listed 14 separate model deployments, all marked with override codes, bypassing, standard validation due to mission-aligned urgency. In the comments, someone had typed, expedite flag, billing on delivery, not accuracy. I kept digging. Deep in the logs, I found export reports, clean compliance certifications, digitally signed, time-stamped, and logged in our delivery tracker. 3 were signed by me, except I'd never seen them. They were forged, inserted after, submission and retrodated using administrative tokens. I checked the digital fingerprints. The creator ID matched a user known only as lvexadmin.leon. Suddenly, it all clicked. This wasn't corner cutting. This was fraud, systematic, calculated, and monetized. NeuralGate wasn't just falsifying compliance, they were charging clients for validations that never happened, securing government contracts by selling speed, not safety. I printed nothing, downloaded nothing, but I recorded everything, screenshots, checksums, hash signatures, all stored on an encrypted drive I kept at home in a case labeled Disaster Recovery. Later that day, Leon called me into his office. He was calm, almost friendly. We're restructuring the oversight group, he said, but we see leadership potential in you. I stared at him. We'd like you to take over risk intelligence. Bigger role, better comp, of course it comes with a standard NDA. I let the silence stretch. You're offering me a promotion, I said, because I've seen too much. He smiled. I'm offering you a way forward. You've done good work. Let's keep it that way. That moment burned into my memory. The moment I knew this company didn't fear error, they feared exposure. I looked at the NDA, then back at him. You don't promote silence, I said. You bribe it. And I walked out. But I wasn't walking away. Not this time. I didn't sleep that night. The recordings, the screenshots, the forged compliance logs, they were all real, and I knew what they meant. NeuralGate wasn't just risking errors. They were risking lives and doing it with full knowledge and intent. But going public would be suicide. I needed help. Someone who understood how to handle corporate fraud at a national security level. I thought of only one person. Luis Choi. Luis had been my mentor during my first post-breach job. The one who taught me that protecting systems wasn't about stopping bad code. It was about stopping good people from justifying bad decisions. He'd retired 5 years ago, but I'd heard through back channels he was doing ethics consulting with a government-adjacent watchdog group. I sent a message through an encrypted burner address, attaching only metadata, no content. He replied, in 6 minutes. We met the next morning in the corner booth of a diner near the old downtown transit yard. Luis looked older, gray hair, slower movements, but his eyes were sharp as ever. I slid him a USB drive across the table. He didn't even glance at it before asking, how many people are you protecting? Everyone who doesn't know what. NeuralGate is delivering, I said. He took a sip of coffee, then nodded. Then you need someone with subpoena power. That's when he told me about Claire Braxton, an investigator with the Department of Algorithmic Integrity, a small but fast-moving federal unit focused on AI compliance and ethical misuse. According to Luis, she was one of the few in DC who didn't care about noise or headlines, only evidence. She's tough, he said, but she doesn't blink when it's messy. Luis connected us within hours. Claire called me directly, no assistant, no secretary wall. This is Braxton, she said. Luis briefed me. You have physical evidence of falsified compliance logs used for federal defense contracts? I have digital forensics. I have metadata. I have forged certs. And I have a company trying to bury all of it. There was a pause. Then her voice, steady and sharp. I'm going to ask you a question, Mr. Monroe, and I need the truth. Go ahead. Are you prepared to go back in? And right there, with Juno watching me from across the living room, I said the only thing that mattered. Yes. Because the truth wasn't enough. I needed proof they couldn't bury. Claire didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, I was back at NeuralGate with a wire, thin enough to hide beneath my collar with a real-time uplink to a secure server outside the company's network perimeter. She called it a redundant integrity chain. I called it my insurance policy. Leon greeted me like nothing had happened. Good to have you back, he said, handing me a new badge and a revised project scope. Let's build something great together. He had no idea. I was assigned to a tactical readiness group, essentially the interface team managing final model reports before submission to defense clients. It was the center of the operation, the place where falsified logs became officially certified documents. Every conversation, every casual directive, every offhand comment, I recorded it all. At first, it was small stuff. Drop that flag. The edge case isn't mission critical. Or, just roll over the previous cert. No need to rerun full validation. But over the days that followed, the language sharpened. We're not going to win this contract if we retrain every time a drone misreads debris as an explosive, Leon said in one meeting. We need plausible deniability, not academic perfection. He said it in front of 5 people. None of them flinched. On day 8, I found what Claire had been hoping for, a document buried in a compressed folder labeled Admin Temp Retired. Inside, a PDF marked Confidential, Velocity Override Directive. It detailed the internal policy authorizing the use of conditioned pass thresholds for high-urgency contracts. In simpler terms, if the client wanted faster delivery, the models would be passed regardless of whether they met the risk standards. But what made the file explosive wasn't the policy. It was the signature block. Leon Wexler, CTO Marianne Roth, Chief Legal Officer Isaac Bendel, Head of Procurement. This wasn't a rogue employee. It was a corporate strategy. That afternoon, Leon pulled me into a closed-door meeting. He seemed restless. His charm, which had always come so easily, now felt tight around the edges. We've had some chatter, he said, eyes narrowing. People think you're reassessing your role here. I didn't speak. He leaned in slightly. Let me be clear. We reward loyalty, but we have a very low tolerance for internal disruption. If you can't get on board with our pace, I'll find someone. Who can? I nodded slowly. I'm on board. I just have questions about Model 18 Delta. It failed visual rec 4 times, but it's marked compliant. He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, I authorized that push. I have discretion under the override protocol. I didn't blink. So you knew it didn't meet minimum compliance? He stared at me. You're not a lawyer, Elias. Stay in your lane. I left the meeting with a single phrase burned into my recorder. I authorized that push. I have discretion under the override protocol. It was enough. The next morning, Claire called me. That's what we needed, she said. You just built the foundation of a federal case. And for the first time in weeks, I breathed, not because I was safe, but because the clock had started, ticking, and NeuralGate had no idea what was coming. It happened on a Tuesday. The timing was intentional. Tuesdays were product review days. Half the staff was either in back-to-back meetings or too distracted by slide decks to notice what was coming. But I did. Claire had warned me the night before. Be in the building by 8 a.m. Stay close to a public-facing workstation. When it begins, don't intervene, just observe. At exactly 8:37 a.m., 3 unmarked black SUVs pulled into the NeuralGate underground lot. 2 agents from the Department of Algorithmic Integrity, a federal prosecutor from the Office of Technology Ethics, and 3 compliance inspectors entered through the main doors like they had every right in the world to be there. Because they did not. Claire Braxton led the group. By 8:41 a.m., the front desk froze. Leon was still in his glass-walled office halfway through an investor call when Claire stepped inside with her badge. "Leon Vexler," she said. "Federal compliance audit. You are required to cease all operations immediately. We are executing a warrant for records related to falsified AI compliance reports and obstruction of federal oversight." Leon's voice dropped mid-sentence. I watched him slowly remove his earpiece, his eyes darting past Claire to the agents, moving through the building like a search algorithm come to life. They didn't knock, they didn't ask, they seized. Within 20 minutes, entire server racks were powered down and removed. External hard drives, internal logs, and backup nodes were bagged and tagged. Conference rooms were repurposed into interview sites. Middle managers sat pale and speechless as inspectors unfolded lists of names. By 10:01 a.m., 3 internal models had been flagged as non-compliant under federal contract standards. All of them had passed on paper, just like I documented. I sat in the break room watching it unfold through the glass wall. No one questioned why I wasn't being interrogated. Claire walked past me once and gave the faintest nod. By 11:03 Leon had lawyered up, but it didn't matter. Claire placed 2 printed pages on the table in front of him. One was the velocity override directive. The other was a transcript, his voice saying, "I authorized that push. I have discretion. Under the override protocol." He went quiet, then pale, then silent. Claire closed her folder. "Mr. Vexler, you are under investigation for conspiracy to defraud the United States government, falsification of compliance documentation, and endangerment through reckless deployment of high-risk AI systems. You have the right to remain silent." He didn't even argue. That afternoon, every active NeuralGate defense contract was frozen. 2 major clients issued formal withdrawal notices within 24 hours. Their legal team tried to spin it as a miscommunication. The press wasn't interested. By the end of the week, NeuralGate's board issued a temporary shutdown notice. Federal inquiries expanded to sister companies in 3 other states. And just like that, the machine stopped. No explosions. No headlines screaming across the sky. Just the sound of systems shutting down and the quiet surgical removal of a cancer that had lived too long inside the code. Justice didn't roar. It audited. NeuralGate never recovered. Its remaining assets were sold off, in fragments, and its name became a quiet warning across the tech industry. Not about AI failure, but about human failure. The kind that hides behind spreadsheets, NDAs, and speed over safety. I didn't walk away with a victory speech or a headline. I walked away with a new title. The Department of Algorithmic Integrity offered me a position as Director of Ethical Systems Oversight. My job now is making sure no other company can trade risk for revenue without consequences. Because in this new era, where machines don't just predict but decide, the greatest danger isn't faulty code. It's the people who pretend it's working when it's not. The truth is, AI doesn't lie. But people do. And if no one speaks up, we all pay the price. If this story made you think differently about trust, technology, or the power of standing your ground, leave a comment that simply says, "Integrity still matters." It lets me know you're out there. And if you want more stories like this, stories that pull back the curtain and show what really happens behind closed doors, subscribe and share this video with someone who still believes that doing the right thing is worth it.